Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I am NECDC Vice President Peter Howe, and on behalf of our President, John Gulliver, and our EV Webinar Committee Chair, Timothy Egan, and our entire Board of Directors and staff, I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us today. Nos participants français, francophones et québécois, québécoises, bonjour et bienvenue. C'est un grand honneur et plaisir de vous accueillir ici aujourd'hui avec the NECDC. We are all so excited to have such a strong and comprehensive group of speakers today representing Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Quebec, and the Canadian federal government to give us some, not just up to the minute, but up to the second insights into the progress that our region on both sides of the border is making towards clean electrification of transportation in many, many realms. Some quick but very important thanks to our event sponsors, the Canadian Consulate in Boston and the Quebec delegation in Boston, and to our event partners, Clean Energy New Hampshire, E2 Tech, and the Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, VEIC. We are so grateful to all of you and your organizations for making this possible today. Now, let me turn it over to our Master of Ceremonies for today's event, a man who is very well known for years, decades, to everyone in New England with a cable television subscription, a consummate newsman and consummate gentleman, Mr. Mike Nikitas. Mike.
Peter, thank you so much. Such a pleasure to be here with all of you and with you, my former colleague. Welcome to everybody in your homes, your offices, wherever you're watching now or on the recording down the line. It is no understatement to say that we are in the midst of an evolving revolution. EV growth is accelerating faster than an EV car in a highway passing lane right now. That remarkable growth is our focus today, how it's driving entrepreneurship, employment, and environmental stewardship in northern New England and in eastern Canada, how it's changing transportation and the economy. In short, how it's improving our lives and the planet. And we'll do this today on this webinar with informative and compelling panels and speakers with plenty of insight, as Peter was saying, from Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Montreal, New Brunswick, the federal government of Canada as well. We begin with the view from Quebec, a province committed to the business of EVs and the climate. That commitment is led by the engagement of a woman most of you already know. She has been Quebec's delegate to New England for nearly a decade now. And it is my great pleasure to kick things off today with the very latest on all of these topics and more from Marie-Claude Francoeur. Marie-Claude?
Thank you so much, Mike. Bonjour à tous, chers amis et collègues. C'est un plaisir pour moi de partager la perspective du Québec sur le secteur des véhicules électriques et intelligents. Today, I'll give you an update on where Quebec stands in the ever-evolving electric and smart transportation sector, and how I see our long-term regional collaborations moving forward. Expressions like fight against climate change, carbon neutral, smart and EVs, green gas emissions have become part of our daily conversations. You've heard me speak on Quebec's visions and policies to reach those objectives, namely its targeted carbon neutrality by 2050. In 2023, the transportation sector still represents 43% of Quebec's GHG emissions. It is by far our largest source of pollution. Electric and smart transportation is the cornerstone of Quebec's strategy. The recently updated plan for a green economy sets a goal of 2 million EVs on Quebec's road by 2030. It is an increase of 400,000 from the previous plan, which will, in itself, represent an additional reduction of 1 megaton of CO2. The Quebec electric and smart transportation sector is well positioned to take on the challenge, and I'll give you a few examples. First, Quebec's natural resources are plentiful and sustainable. We do have hydroelectricity, which is a renewable source, and a bounty of strategic minerals deposits such as lithium, aluminum, graphite, just to name a few, and they are mined in an equitable and responsible way. Second, an almost complete value chain supported by favorable public policies. In the past months, Quebec has announced investments of 9 billion Canadian dollars to accelerate its climate and energy transition. 3.8 billion investments to electrify the transportation sector for public and active transportation and for the adaptation to climate change. Quebec also supports the industry via grants and loans, attracting investment and asserting its position as a leader of the green economy in North America. Recently, Granby became the first city in Canada with a copper foil factory for electric vehicles batteries, thanks to the arrival of Volta. The Canadian federal government announced nearly $30 million in investment for 1,500 additional EV chargers across Quebec, including 400 fast chargers. The government of Quebec also announced the deployment of 116,000 additional public chargers, including 6,700 fast ones, over the course of the next 5 years across Quebec. Additionally, 600,000 additional parking spaces adapted for EVs will be made available in multi-unit residential dwellings. We also have a robust charging network. The electric circuit is Canada's first public charging station network. Flow, which is a Quebec-based designer and operator of EV charging systems, offer one of the most extensive networks in North America, and you'll hear from them a little later. Fourth, we do have a booming cluster composed of innovative companies. In 2023, the electric and smart transportation industry represents over 9,000 direct jobs, a 51% increase over 3 years in 177 companies, with a consolidated turnover of $3.3 billion. It is a know-how for the manufacturing of light, heavy, and specialized vehicles. Fifth, we do have a skilled workforce spread out of top academic institutions, which have developed curriculum exclusively focused on EV. The Cégep de Saint-Jérôme, which is the equivalent of a community college in the US, was the first to develop such a program. Over the years, the offering has expanded quite significantly from programs related to the conception and fabrication of EVs. Now they offer programs on maintenance of EVs and other related issues, including one specifically dedicated to police forces for safe interventions in incidents with an electric vehicle. Their reputation has attracted the attention of several academic institutions in North America, and they're always open to collaborate. This last asset is at the core of our future collaborations. As our panelists will tell us, the clean energy and EV sectors are booming in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. The need for a qualified workforce is greater than ever, and it is often a major stumbling block for our partners. Over the past few years, our office has facilitated exchanges between higher education institutions from Quebec and New England to develop a shared curriculum. With all that being said, we also have to factor in the reality of the transportation of goods, especially in the heavy-duty sector. Ultimately, the goal is to electrify everything. However, we probably cannot electrify all 18-wheelers fleet, at least not in the short term, and there are no heavy-duty EV charging corridor at the moment linking Eastern Canada to New England. Therefore, in order to increase the efficiency of this sector, we must work to include green alternatives to the energy mix, such as hydrogen and bioenergy. Finally, beyond political will and big industry buy-in, these policies will only be successful if the community gets involved. I can't wait to hear about Vermont, Maine, and New Hampshire strategies and best practices. I'm sure that together we can engage our populations, educate a new and older generation of workers, and continue our efforts to decarbonize and strengthen our regional economy. Merci beaucoup et bon panel.
Thank you, Marie-Claude. And you mentioned you can't wait to hear, so we're going to hear. And we move now to the first of our 3 panels this afternoon. And we begin in Vermont and the newest developments in the electrification of mass transportation. You know, who can forget those trolley buses with the overhead lines we had for so long? There are still a few of those around now. But now we're on to a new era with a new strategy and a new model. And it is made possible in no small part to the U.S. bipartisan infrastructure law here in the United States. Your moderator for this panel is Jennifer Wallace Broder, Clean Transportation Director of the VEIC, the Vermont Energy Investment Corporation. And Jennifer, I know you'll introduce your panelists. It's all yours.
Thank you so much, Mike. I'm very happy to be here. And really looking forward to everybody joining us for this panel on electrifying mass transportation. So transit electrification is accelerating in the US and across our region. The US bipartisan infrastructure law allocated $5.5 billion to the low or no emissions vehicle program through FY 2026. This program provides significant funding to transit agencies to support zero emission technology and has been a catalyst for electric bus adoption. Just this past summer, the Federal Transit Administration awarded $1.22 billion from the Low-No program to support the transition to zero-emission bus technology. And over $371 million has been awarded to transit agencies in New England since 2017. With this funding, battery electric buses are getting on the road and transit agencies are starting to get experience with the technology. VEIC, the organization I work for, is supporting transit providers with electrification projects in Vermont and Massachusetts. We are learning that buses can realize operational savings and emissions reductions. Several states in New England have emissions reductions targets, and transit is a key strategy, both from the perspective of electrification and increasing transit ridership to reduce vehicle miles traveled. However, electric bus benefits also come with challenges. In some cases, equipment and software are not reliable, staff training is needed, there are safety considerations for fire suppression and dealing with high voltage electricity, and often significant upgrades to facilities and electrical capacity are needed. These are all challenges to be overcome, and I'm really excited that this panel can share some of their lessons learned and experiences with this technology. So with that, the panel will provide a high-level discussion of the opportunities and challenges of transit electrification. I'm going to start by introducing our first panelist, who is Clayton Clark, General Manager of Green Mountain Transit, to talk about their experiences with electric buses in Northwest Vermont. He will then be followed by Scott Saunders, an electrical engineer with QTRIC, to talk about the Canadian experience with electric buses. And finally, we'll hear from Ross McDonald, the Transit Division Director for the Vermont Agency of Transportation, to talk about their strategy to advance electric buses in the state. So I'd like to invite Clayton to come on camera and share his experiences with buses in his transit agency. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And are folks able to see me and hear me well?
I don't think we can see you, Clayton. We can see your name, but maybe adjust your camera.
I have the video shared. Let me turn it off and turn it back on again. Did that help at all?
I think it's just the position of your camera.
Oh,
showing the ceiling.
I'm sorry. See, I turn off the self view because I find that I'm the type of narcissist that will just stare at myself. And so is this better?
I'm still not seeing you, but maybe we should.
Okay. I'm gonna, do you see my hand crossing?
Yes.
I went to the wrong camera for my laptop.
There you go. Perfect.
There we go. So sorry about that, everybody.
No worries.
So thank you, Jennifer, for the introduction. And so Green Mountain Transit operates in Northwest Vermont, as you heard from Jennifer, and that includes Burlington. And so Burlington is the only place in Vermont that has urban transit in the state. And in our urban fleet, we have 60 full-size city buses. And at the present, we have 2 electric battery buses, 2 Proterras, and we have 5 new flyers who are going to be arriving in 2024. And then we have another 17 new flyers that will be arriving in the years coming. So we're going to be making a pretty significant shift from 2 to 24 buses, which will be about 40% of our fleet when this transition is accomplished. And so I arrived at GMT in January of this year, and so I'm coming in mid transition. And what I want to do is to express to you some of the things that I've noticed as as the executive of the organization, the things that have become apparent to me as you all consider whether electrification makes sense for your organization. And so there's 4 things that I want to cover. 3 I'm going to cover now, and then 1 later with the follow-up question, hopefully if there's time. And so for the 3 things that I'm going to be covering now, we're going to be talking a little bit about capacity for problem solving capacity, a little bit about the spirit of the organization as far as whether there's a entrepreneurial mindset that is okay with uncertainty. And lastly, going to touch in a little bit about incentives, which of course are important for emerging technologies. So what do I mean about capacity? The thing that you all need to know is that if you want to make the migration, there's going to be a lot of problems that need to be solved. And I don't say problems in the sense that, oh, problems are a bad thing. Problems are opportunities. But when it comes to making this transition, your organization is going to need to have capacity at your problem solving level. So if you're looking at your management workforce and you're like, this group of people is already kind of struggling to get through the daily activities, then I would be hesitant to think about making a transition, because what we're finding is that since this is an emerging technology, since you are going to be having to, in many cases, invent the wheel for your location, that it takes management capacity. And I think that that's something that people need to, realize coming in. The other thing that I would encourage people to think about is how is the organization, how is the organization's leadership with uncertainty? Again, this is an emerging technology. We know that we are going to be making this transition to having 40% of our buses be electric battery buses, but we don't know exactly how we're going to implement this. We don't know, as we heard from Jennifer, the answers to some of those long list of problems that we're going to have to solve. And so what that means is that there needs to be sort of an entrepreneurial mindset where whoever is doing this transition can be comfortable knowing that they don't have all of the answers starting out and beginning the beginning of this process. And so if it's an organization that is really struggles with uncertainty, again, it's something that I would consider, about maybe waiting. If it's an organization that thrives with that, hey, full speed ahead. Lastly, I want to talk about incentives. Because as folks know, incentives are a great way to encourage emerging technologies. And so because we're learning as we go, because we're trying things out, I'm going to tell you that the service of our two existing buses hasn't been, what we would like. And so if this were a performance-based pilot where we were saying, hey, we're going to try these two buses, see how they work, and if they work well, then we'll continue. If it was that type of experiment, we would probably say, this didn't meet our needs, so we're going to stop. But because there's the incentives, that makes the underperformance palatable in these early stages of deployment. And so I think that it's going to be really critical for folks to realize that they need to be aware of the incentives, because over time, we expect that performance will improve, standards will come about, that a lot of these things that we're working on to get answers to, will be resolved, and incentives, will decrease. And so that the expectation is that eventually these, buses will be something that the full price of them would be something that an organization would accept because of the return on investment. And so I say that now because I think that anyone who's in a general manager's chair and is thinking about doing this transition is really going to want to look at what those incentives are, because also those incentives are going to help you solve some of the problems that do come up. We're very lucky that we have a partnership with FTA and VTrans, so that, say, we heard from Jennifer that there was something that came up about fire suppression. Well, if we know that we have to upgrade our fire suppression system, we have a relationship with those two other government providers. They're going to be able to provide the financial incentives that makes it acceptable to us to take on that risk. So I think that those are the areas that I would mention now. Just making sure that you have the capacity for problem solving, making sure that you're comfortable with, the uncertainty of moving in a new direction, and making sure that you understand the incentives that are going to be there to help you with the transition while the technology is working the bugs out. And that's what I have, Jennifer, and I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Clayton. Really very practical and helpful perspectives there. I did want to note, and I should have said this at the beginning, that we have built in some time for questions from the audience. So if you have questions, just feel free to post them in chat and we'll try to get those at the end. So in the meantime, I'd like to turn the floor over to Scott with Qtrich to talk a little bit about what's happening in Canada and some of the projects they've been working on.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. I hope everyone can hear me today. I'm excited to be here. My name is Scott Saunders. I'm an electrical engineer with the Canadian Urban Transit Research and Innovation Consortium. I know that's a mouthful, so we go with Qtrich for short. But yeah, we were born a membership-based non-for-profit consortium that operates all over Canada. And we provide value to our members through developing resources and hosting committee sessions for our members with expert voices across multiple industries, including transit leaders, manufacturers of buses and chargers, utilities, scientists, and kind of anything else that relates to transit or transitioning to zero emission buses. But we've since grown into two other areas of business. So our second area of business is our commercialization projects. So our main marquee project has been the Pan-Canadian Electric Bus Demonstration and Integration Trial. So this was 18 buses that were installed in 7 high-power pantograph chargers across Canada. And these buses came from multiple manufacturers, as did the chargers. And the goal of this was to have those different manufacturers of buses be able to charge with the different manufacturers of chargers, and to standardize that process across Canada to create a competitive market that reduces costs for the transit agencies and also makes it palatable for new players to come into the game and compete, so that agencies aren't tied down by the chargers they purchase or the buses they purchase to invest in more infrastructure. And I'm happy to say that we have developed that standard in Canada now, and that we're currently in the empirical analysis phase where we have well over a year of data from these buses and are implementing that into some of the work we do, as well as providing that information to our members as a value add. Finally, our third area of business is our zero emission bus consulting team, or we call them the ZEBC team. And that's the team that I'm coming from. And our bread and butter within our consulting team is our RootEye system, which is our modeling software that we developed in-house that can model existing market zero emission buses. So that's all the battery electric buses on the market today, as well as hydrogen buses and CNG buses that are operating on renewable natural gas. We can model those buses in our clients' systems, those being transit agencies that are either our members or not our members. It doesn't matter to work with our consulting team. We can model those buses on a block by block level and show the success rates based on in-depot charging for BEVs or in-depot plus en route charging for battery electric buses, or how much of a route can be completed with 1 hydrogen fuel or 2, those kinds of things. And that block level analysis provides the amount of detail you need to really take that next step in your planning, which is to understand the infrastructure you require. So what that also does is help us understand a few of the concerns that apply specifically to Canada, or even more specifically to Northern New England and Eastern Canada, which is what is the impact of the HVAC on these buses, like the heating systems and cooling systems? How much does that impact our range, and about what times of the years are you going to see that degradation? As well, also very prevalent to New England and New Brunswick and Nova Scotia and Quebec is rural agencies. We're seeing an uptick in rural communities bringing on public transit. And in a lot of cases, it's in the form of this on-demand service, which is usually a software service where buses can be called via an app and take you directly to your destination, typically in a rideshare type format. So we've developed IP in-house and changed our RootEye system to be able to model those as well. So we're seeing a lot of these these new situations that are specific to sort of the Northern Hemisphere and really taking those on. But all of that information from our modeling work gets fed into the work that I do with helping our clients plan out the infrastructure and identify opportunities, costs, and impacts of the implementing a bus trial at their facility, all the way to doing a full fleet implementation with all the en route charging and things that they require to successfully meet their decarbonization goals. So on top of that, our team is also well versed in producing market scans to understand new emerging technologies and what transit agencies are doing elsewhere. And we also have a new portion of our work that takes into account social considerations and prioritizing on a block by block level what blocks should be decarbonized first to better improve social outcomes within your region. So sort of a holistic consulting team that's looking to both improve transit, but also help transition to zero emission buses. And with that being said, I just wanted to give a little bit of the Canadian insight on our sources of funding today. And that main one is from the federal government here, and it's the Zero Emission Transit Fund, which is $2.7 billion that was earmarked back in 2021 for 2 phases of application. So the first phase is the planning, which CUTRIC was actually named the preferred partner of the federal government for this, where 80% of the costs incurred for doing a planning work with us can be covered by that fund, and leaving only about 20% to be paid by the transit agency or other sources of funding. And finally, the second phase, which is actually where that money can go towards purchasing battery electric or fuel cell buses and the infrastructure required to charge or fuel them. And so that's the part we're starting to see now as agencies really start to increase the amount of buses they're bringing in, similar to the numbers that Clayton just mentioned, and really starting to ramp up their fleets. So that's a little bit of the Canadian perspective. We certainly have work across the country, but we have completed a few jobs recently in the Eastern Canada area, and I have lots of experience I'd love to discuss further, sort of that pertains to New England and Eastern Canada. So thank you very much. Excited to be here.
Thanks so much, Scott. And just moving us along, I'd like to invite Ross to come on camera and talk a little bit about, provide the state perspective on Vermont and transit electrification strategies here.
Sure. Well, hello, Jennifer, and good afternoon, everyone. VTrans is part of a statewide effort to reduce greenhouse gases. We have a climate action plan, we have a comprehensive energy plan, and there are definite roles for public transit and VTrans as a whole. We're a little unsure exactly what type of services need to be expanded for us to meet some greenhouse gas reduction goals, but we do know that whatever services we have would be best served on electric vehicles to the extent practical. So we'll work out the details and get recommendations on evenings and weekend services, more micro transit services and demand response that Scott had mentioned just a few minutes ago. But for now, we continue to enter into this electrification process in a pragmatic way. And to date, VTrans, working with VEIC, has received 7 straight low and no emission bus and bus facility grant awards, totaling over $48 million, including local and state funds for 44 vehicles, the charging infrastructure, the facility and utility fit ups, as well as training. So with all of that in place, funding in place, I'm also reporting that progress has been relatively slow. We have 6 total heavy duty buses on the road throughout Vermont, the 2 that Clayton spoke of earlier, which has not provided the return on investment and operational efficiency we were hoping to see. We also have 2 in our Upper Valley Connecticut River area, and we have 2 more in our Rutland region. Those are different buses performing much better than those 2 vehicles that Clayton is operating at this time. But we are working over the next several months to clear those procurements and to release the RFPs necessary to bring in those additional vehicles totaling 44 units and seeing what those impacts are on operations. We'll also very likely use this next low-no grant application to address facility needs, like the fire suppression scenario that Clayton mentioned. So that when the industry does catch up and can provide us the specifications necessary to cover those routes and blocks that Scott mentioned, that our facilities are in a better position to scale up. So we have a lot of work to do. The providers have all voiced their understanding and support, willingness to move through this process and contribute to the ongoing pilots and assessments necessary to move forward down this path. The legislature expects that our agency and the public are also expecting these efforts to move ahead. So we're not really looking at these as pilots so much as early stages of phase one of the electrification plan. And I believe, Jen, you may have that to link if anybody would like to see where we are with our initial electrification plan. That will be updated with lessons learned that VEIC is sharing around the state at this time, based on the small amount of vehicles that have been put in service to date. So really, that's where we are at VTrans, and we're looking forward to moving ahead. And we know the riders and the public supports these efforts, but we do need the industry to catch up and provide us with the right equipment.
Great, thank you so much, Ross. And I'm not sure I have total access to all of the participants. I'm hoping that Tim can help me get that link posted if he hasn't already. Thank you so much. So I think we have time for a few questions. We have a couple teed up for our panel that I helped develop. So we'll start with those. And we have about 10 minutes for this. So I'm going to try to keep us tight on our responses. So Clayton, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about some of the unexpected challenges that you've had to address in operating electric buses, and maybe some high level takeaways beyond what you already shared, which were super helpful.
Right. Happy to do that. And I'm going to take an unexpected turn. I shouldn't be surprised about this as having a career as a manager, but when you make this transition, you need to be thinking about people as much as the technical, the details. There's a whole lot of organizational, internal change management that needs to happen. Certainly, if you have your own fleet maintenance staff, to make sure that they're, supported during this process. But also, the thing about, again, an emerging technology is that it's not always unanimous that this is, necessarily the right direction. And one of the things that I've noticed is, for example, I work on a board of commissioners, I report to a board of commissioners, and some of the commissioners feel that this is not the right direction. And so what I'm bringing up is that the general manager or whoever the executive is going to need to spend a lot of time, using their people skills to move in this direction. And so make sure that you don't underestimate that cost. Yeah.
Thank you, Clayton. That's very insightful and very helpful. I think that's something we're seeing as well, that this engages a lot of people in transit agencies. And if you don't think about that, you're going to be back on your heels a little bit. So thank you. Scott, I was wondering, for those agencies that maybe haven't started yet, or just contemplating this, we're getting some good advice from everybody, but what would you suggest as first steps? Somebody's like, this sounds pretty interesting. We might want to go this route. What would you suggest as a first thing? Couple first steps for folks?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my my favorite piece of advice to give is to just get out there and understand some of the experiences that the transit agencies that have implemented this technology are having, because the lessons learned are coming out faster than we can write them down in a lot of cases. So just make sure you're going to the source and getting that information from those that have lived it, and it's not necessarily always at the manager or VP level. Sometimes you need to get your maintenance team in, talking with the maintenance team of the agencies that have implemented these technologies, and get an understanding of what are the nitty-gritty lessons learned that they're seeing out in the field operating and maintaining these vehicles. The second thing I'd say is that the one thing I've learned about working with transit agencies is that when you've seen one, you've seen one. There's all different. There's not a whole lot of similarities sometimes between these transit agencies, and it really depends on the staffing, the geography, and things like that. That really impacts the way these transit agencies operate now and will operate when they transition to a full fleet. So it's important to work with a planning team that can help bring that out and identify some of the issues and how they'll affect your transit agency in particular. One good example we have is that your local utility can make a huge difference. We've seen that with Eastern Canada, a lot of the utilities have a cap on the size of a transformer that comes into a facility that they'll provide before you need a customer-owned substation. And in a lot of cases, the transition will bring you above the capacity for that customer-owned substation, which means these transit agencies all of a sudden need to start hiring electrical engineers and electricians to manage their infrastructure. And it really takes them away from their core, which is being a transit agency. So that's just one example of a variable between transit agencies that can really change the way your transition can go.
Yeah, thank you so much, Scott. And Ross, you gave us a little bit of a teaser on what you think might be coming next in Vermont. But is there anything more you'd like to add in terms of like what you see as next steps in terms of the transit electrification plan or priorities that you see emerging over the next, 3 years or so?
Sure. I think that we need to get VEIC's presentation over the 3 pilot assessments that have been conducted thus far in front of everybody, in front of Clayton's board, in front of all boards and stakeholders. So we know, that 2 vehicles in Burlington don't represent, the future, that we do have better outcomes and better vehicles already out there on the road. We do need to take that information and update that electrification plan. While it was published 2 years ago, it, as Scott had mentioned, it's such a dynamic industry. We do need to update that with the lessons learned and everything we're seeing. Charging issues, not least of which was really surprising to us to have the level of issues we've had throughout the state with that infrastructure. And then lastly, I think over the next 3 years, we really do need to bring in the vehicles that we have received funding for and really understand the impacts to the smaller providers. Most of our providers are, small rural entities, and really revise the implementation schedules accordingly. And so got it started. Everyone's done their work, and now we need to use that real-time experience to guide the future if we truly are going to fully electrify.
Wonderful. Thank you all. First of all, I want to just say I really appreciate that you've been right on time. This is a tight schedule and appreciate everybody being brief and to the point. So with that said, we have a couple minutes. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but again, I'm not totally sure that I'm seeing everything, but I wanted to make sure that we address any questions that might be coming in from the audience. So Mike, I don't know if you're seeing anything there. If there aren't, I have others I can tee up.
I am not, but I was struck as just someone watching by several of the points made, and particularly Clayton, that when it comes to government, it's not just the technology, it's the people skills, the practical questions of it takes an employee capacity to problem solve and also leadership in uncertain times. No one likes uncertainty and change, particularly I might say in government. And so that really resonated for me. And I don't know, Clayton, it sounds like it's such an important point when we talk about this topic.
Yeah, thank you. And I noticed that every time I would talk to people about this, they would focus on the technical details. And then I would go, home, back to my home shop and, hear sort of, people's grumblings. And I'd realize, oh, we just have not invested the time into getting these people on board, getting these people to understand, how this system works, getting folks to, to Ross's point that, these two weren't really a pilot. This is the start of a new direction. And because there is that negotiation of, hey, why are we proceeding when this didn't work out well? And, that just requires, having human relationships to let folks know, yeah, this is, sort of what we would expect with the new technology, and it's not a derailer.
Yeah. Such an important point. Anything else you'd like to add, Jennifer or Ross or Scott?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, Jennifer, thank you so much. Thank you, Clayton. Thank you, Ross and Scott, for your insights and experiences, mass transit in Vermont and in Canada. And now we move on to the New Hampshire experience and implementing EV infrastructure. People and businesses, I think, on both sides of the border do benefit, but it's not easy, as we know, including all the problems we just talked about. What are the latest challenges when it comes to infrastructure, and what are the lessons learned so far? Your moderator and these panelists, which you'll hear from shortly, know firsthand. They've got a lot to share. Chris Skoglund is the Director of Energy Transition at Clean Energy New Hampshire. So, Chris, it's all over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike. Can you hear me okay?
I can. I think everybody can.
All right. Excellent. Just wanted to make sure. It's so great to be with you all today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the New England Canada Business Council. I had the good fortune of working for years with the New England Governors and Eastern Canadian Premiers Group with colleagues all over the northern Eastern Canadian states, working primarily on a climate action plan that was released in 2017, and really enjoyed that experience and getting to see the different perspectives. Today, we'll be talking about electric vehicles, but going from public transportation and scaling down to look at the more single occupancy vehicles. And EVs typically are held up as an electric vehicles are typically held up as an energy and environmental solution because they use 25% of the conventional internal combustion energy. But they represent a significant opportunity because they save so much energy, but the transportation sector, like in a state like New Hampshire, represents almost 42% of the total energy consumed by our state. Therefore, the transition to electric vehicles could significantly reduce our overall demand on energy consumption, reduce our reliance on energy imports, and significantly reduce air pollutants, those that are more traditional, as well as greenhouse gases. However, New Hampshire is not an island. We are very much part of a regional market and recognize that there is significant growth that we're going to see in EVs to our northern neighbors and in our southern states, and we'll be in a bit of a friendly competition with the states around us, Massachusetts and Maine, for some of the vehicles that may travel. I don't want to step too much into our panelists' points, but it is worth noting in advance that the areas that people will be moving through in Vermont, Maine, and New Hampshire tend to be very rural, or can be very rural, and these will have lower utilization rates or even seasonal use for EVs in the early years. And we need to be planning for how we're going to be building out infrastructure in advance of the arrival of electric vehicles, and to ensure that we have the infrastructure in place, but the business case is being made throughout. Today, we'll be hearing directly from an old colleague of mine, Jessica Wilcox. She's the Mobile Source Supervisor from the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services in the Air Resources Division. She's going to be providing a level setting introduction that provides a more detailed background on some of the points that I just made. And we'll be talking about the implications those EVs have for the regional travel and tourism sector and the challenges to meeting that demand for adequate charging, which is really kind of being developed from scratch. We're then going to hear from Rose Linoff, who is the Business Development Manager with Flow EV Charging. She's going to provide the charging provider's view, looking through the lens of Flow and a particular project that they're developing in Errol, New Hampshire. We'll then hear from Steve Conti, who is the EV Project Manager in the Electric Mobility Division with Eversource Energy, which operates in Mass, Connecticut, and New Hampshire. He's taking a break from preparing for Hurricane Lee to join us today. Thank you so much on both counts, Steve. And he's going to share the utilities perspective on preparing for transportation infrastructure. I want to maximize the amount of time that we have for our panelists, so I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Wilcox.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris, and hello, everybody. I'm really pleased to be here today to provide an overview of New Hampshire's electric vehicle and EV charging activities. So what's driving the EV transition? Working in air resources for the Granite State, air quality is a priority of our work. And as you heard Chris say, in New Hampshire, the largest source of carbon emissions is from transportation, cars and trucks. Electric vehicles, particularly those that don't have a tailpipe, are a solution. In addition to the public health and environmental benefits of electric vehicles, EVs do represent an economic opportunity for New Hampshire's tourism industry. Now, Quebec has committed to 2 million EVs by 2030, and states from Virginia all the way up to Maine have adopted California's zero emissions vehicle mandate, which is requiring automakers to sell hundreds of thousands of EVs in the region over the next decade. As more EV drivers are visiting, working, and living in our state, they're going to be looking for places to plug in. New Hampshire's main streets, our rural communities, our tourist attractions and travel destinations are already EV hotspots, and they are all season long. So there's going to be some challenges and some opportunities, and certainly some lessons learned from projects that have gone before. Let's take a look at the current state of charge. Next slide, please. It almost appears like the slides aren't loading properly, but okay. That looked better. I don't know what you had last was there. Can folks see the chart on the slide?
I think it needs to hit advance one more time. There you go.
Can you go back one? There is a chart. There's supposed to be a chart there. I don't see it though. Somehow maybe got missed. So as of the end of 2022, there were over 9,700 plug-in electric vehicles registered in New Hampshire, and that was all battery and plug-in hybrids. As you can't see on this slide, but what you could if the chart was there, is that the majority were registered in the Seacoast region, the Queen City of Manchester, which is our largest city, and also the surrounding suburbs to that. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So EV registrations in New Hampshire are increasing year over year and are currently closing in on 1% of light duty vehicle registrations. This doesn't account for our tourists, the snowbirds, the folks that come to our state and then head back to Florida or warmer states, and our weekend visitors. Go ahead to the next slide. Now in 2022, and thank you, Chris, for this slide, ISO New England, who is our grid operator, projected that New Hampshire would see an increase in all battery electric vehicles, or BEVs, from 5,000 in 2022 to 65,000 in 2031, and that New England would see an increase from a total of 50,000 BEVs to 1.5 million. We got excited about that. Next slide, please. Fast forward a year, and based on current numbers, those projections have actually increased substantially, with an almost 55% increase for New Hampshire and 35% increase for New England. Next slide, please. So as Chris kind of alluded to, and as I mentioned earlier, tourism in New Hampshire is our second largest industry. In 2022, destination spending generated $6.5 billion. Approximately 9.4 million tourists visited New Hampshire, with over 60% of those from Massachusetts. In addition, New Hampshire usually sees about 350,000 Canadian tourists per year. Next slide, please. So how do we support these folks that are driving EVs to New Hampshire? I'm glad that I put my data points in because I think my pictures are missing here from my slides, but there are currently 156 public level 2 chargers in New Hampshire, and that does not include Tesla. Note that Vermont and Maine have double that, with Massachusetts having 6 times as many. Next slide, please. Currently, there are 26 universal DC fast charging locations, and that also does not include Tesla. Once again, our neighboring states have double and quadruple the number of DC fast chargers. So there's certainly work to be done. Next slide. Now, New Hampshire DES is the lead agency for the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust funding, and New Hampshire committed the full 15% of that settlement funding to EV charging. So that's about $4.6 million that we had to work with. Resulting from a direct current fast charging funding opportunity that DES is currently administering, we received 30 proposals for multiple sites along high travel transportation corridors. As you can't see from the map, we were seeking a minimum of 50 kilowatt DC fast chargers with co-located level 2 charges to enable north-south and east-west travel for EVs. Next slide, please. The intent is ultimately to create a backbone of charging for New Hampshire. So far, contracts for 6 sites have been approved by New Hampshire's governor and executive council, with more sites being currently in the contract negotiation phase. Next slide, please. Now, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also known as BILL, provides funding to federal highways to implement the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, or the NEVI program. New Hampshire's DOT is the lead agency who is receiving approximately $17 million over 5 years to implement direct current fast charging projects along our federally designated transportation corridors. Next slide. New Hampshire DOT has developed a deployment plan and is currently preparing, and we're super excited about this, for a September 29th release of a competitive solicitation seeking direct current fast charging project proposals on select designated EV corridors. Now, next slide, please. Federal Highways has additional discretionary funding for other corridor and also community charging programs. And just this June, New Hampshire DES submitted an application for $10 million proposing to create a statewide community EV charging sub-grant program that would target our main streets, our tourist destinations, and gaps. This is competitive funding, so states are not guaranteed that if they apply for this funding, they're going to get it, but we're hoping to hear more on that by October 1st. Next slide, please. Now, transportation electrification announcements have become a consistent and steady drumbeat. From EV-focused federal funding opportunities like the BIL and the IRA, to new EV model announcements by automakers, which seem to be happening every day, to states inquiring or requiring increasing sales of electric vehicles over the next decade. Bills that passed New Hampshire's 2023 legislative session reflect that the New Hampshire legislature is asking for more information. As you can see on this slide, Senate Bill 52 updates certain regulations for EV infrastructure construction projects and also establishes a committee to study potential funding sources for EV charging infrastructure. HB 111 establishes a committee to study EV charging for renters. HB 412 establishes a committee to study revenue alternatives to the road toll, and that can affect EVs. And ultimately, House Bill 2 established a $100 annual registration surcharge for fully electric vehicles and a $50 surcharge for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And this funding would go to the highway fund. Next slide, please. So if we want to ensure that EVs can travel everywhere, not just in our corridors and our hubs, then as Chris says, and I hear it often, far more charging is needed than current funding can address. That is where we see businesses, our utilities, our municipalities, our towns and cities playing an important role. Because when it comes to EVs and EV charging infrastructure, let's keep them coming. Back over to you, Chris.
So if we can hold it at this slide, thank you very much, Jessica. That was an impressive run through of slides that weren't quite working out like we hoped. I'm just pausing it on this slide because if anyone is interested, please reach out to Jessica at the email address. If you can't read it because you're on some sort of other device, it's jessica.wilcox, WILCOX @des.nh.gov, and she'll make sure we can get that presentation to you. Because the slides and the data that she did share really do add to the story. But I think one thing that I will, rather than asking a question at the end, just note that a lot of the legislation that Jessica points out to was driven not by the traditional environmental groups that have been asking for CAL-LEV or the zero emission vehicle mandate in New Hampshire. New Hampshire is the lone state in New England that has not yet adopted it. And it wasn't gotten through because there was energy advocates that were pushing on it, looking for low carbon as well. It was actually largely driven by the broader economic community, travel and tourism interests, business interests, reaching out to legislators and letting them know that regardless of what New Hampshire does, EVs are coming in the states and provinces surrounding us. And if we're going to remain competitive, we need to be looking into this issue. And that message struck home in a way that the environmental and economic, and climate arguments had not resonated. So there are committees that started meeting last week after taking the summer off, and we're hoping that they will result in fruitful legislation in the future to get at some of the enabling elements that need to happen. But now I want to turn it over to Rose. So next slide. Rose is the development manager with Flow EV Charging, and she's going to speak about their organization's views on charging, but also specifically a project that Jessica just touched on, the Arrow project, which is in a remote part of New Hampshire. Over to you, Rose.
Thank you so much. You can go to the next slide, please. It looks like my slides are also not showing up with all of the data, so that's okay. We'll make it through. Hello, everybody. My name is Rose Lenoff, and I'm a business development manager at Flow, focused on site acquisition. If you're not familiar with Flow, we were founded in 2009, and we are a vertically integrated charging station network provider. We both design and manufacture our own hardware equipment, but we provide the network and software services integrated into our stations as well. And we are the largest charging station network in Canada and the third largest charging station network across all of North America. To date, we have well over 100,000 charging stations deployed, and that number is growing year after year. Next slide, please. So we offer two different business models at Flow. Again, not all of the visuals are showing up, but that's okay. The first business model that we offer is the one that we've been offering since 2011, which is when we got our first chargers in the ground, what we call the traditional model. This is where we sell customers our stations and we operate and manage the deployed units for the customer. Flow Infra is a new business model that Flow recently launched. It is our own and operate business model. In this case, Flow will come in, we'll work with site hosts all over Canada and all over the US to install DC fast chargers. We will pay for 100% of project costs, including hardware, software, installation, operation, and maintenance. And then we'll pay our site hosts a rental fee for access to their parking spots. Next slide, please. Flow has been offering our own and operate model since 2017 in Canada, but we really only started launching it in the United States this year. And so as we were launching a new business model, we thought it was pertinent to conduct interviews, both of the drivers in our network as well as other EV drivers, just to get a better sense of people's experiences at the stations. What are folks expecting when they pull up to a unit? What types of solutions are they looking for? So from this data that we gathered over the 18-month period, actually next slide, please. We were able to garner that most charging, when not happening at home, is happening at a DC fast charger. When we're talking with folks about planning sites, we were hearing over and over again that chargers needed to be in areas that were easily accessible and highly visible from the road, and folks wanted amenities nearby too. And ultimately, the number one thing that kept coming up is that there simply is not enough DC fast charging or rapid charging available, and Jessica's numbers would indicate that to our findings to be accurate. So next slide, please. In Canada, we have been deploying DC fast chargers and level 2 stations for quite some time, and in fact, most of our chargers in Quebec, up in the province, are in rural locations. We have stations deployed every 50 kilometers, which is about every 30 miles for the public to use. And this wouldn't be possible without our relationship with Hydro-Quebec, the provincial utility. But in the US, it's equally as important for us to connect our charging networks on both sides of the border. And so putting stations in rural areas throughout New England is paramount in order to achieve our goals. So we began doing significant research and outreach to site hosts in across New England, and we were put in touch with a gentleman who owns a general store in Errol, New Hampshire. I was actually looking it up this morning. I said, you know, the town of 1,000 is on the slide deck. That's Wikipedia told me that it's actually closer to 300. So it's a very small municipality, but it is less than an hour away from the Quebec border. It is right on the border with Maine, and it's not too far away from Vermont. So this is a location that is right off of a highway corridor and easily accessible by tourists and residents throughout the greater region. So we thought that there was a real need to put DC fast charging at the site. The general store in 2020 unfortunately burned down. And when we were connected with the site host, they were in the process of rebuilding their store. So we ended up responding to the New Hampshire VW RFP that was out in 2021 and were selected for the project. So we worked very closely with the site host on determining the correct number of stations deployed, the right capacity for stations to deploy, and we are now in the process of getting them installed and launched. I'm really hoping to have this project off the ground before winter starts this year. There are a number of learning opportunities from this project that I think can be replicated for other rural charging projects. The first one is that the RFP stipulated that the utility needed to be involved in the conversation from the onset. So before any work was done, we got Eversource involved to confirm that we could bring power to the site, or that there would be enough power for the chargers. I think this is a great reference point for other projects, is get the utility involved as soon as possible. Another learning opportunity from this project is, like, yes, we are deploying DC fast chargers, but we're also deploying high capacity level 2 stations. And a lot of other sites that we're working with for in rural New England, high capacity level 2s are a great alternative to DC fast chargers. These are stations that run off of an 80 amp circuit and are single phase as opposed to 3-phase, which just makes it a lot easier to deploy if power capacity is not available. So just to wrap things up, I think I'm at time now, but just want to really emphasize that Flow is eager to get stations in the ground in rural locations, and we will gladly work with customers to determine what the best type of chargers we should deploy based on the customer's needs, based on power capacity. And in addition, we have different types of business models that can help on the financial side if that is going to be a limitation on being able to get stations deployed. So I think in 2 slides actually is my contact information. If anybody is interested in reaching out, I would be certainly happy to speak with them.
All right. Unfortunately, it looks like that information didn't pop up. But I'll work with the program administrators, and they are going to see about using a workaround for our next speaker, Steve Conti, who's with Eversource. Eversource is the utility that Rose just mentioned. I've been working with Eversource for about the past 4 years on trying to get some make ready through our Public Utilities Commission, the regulatory body that oversees utility programs. And so I'm going to let Steve take it away from here.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And thank you to the NECBC for having me today. Looks like the slides are working, which is great. So just to introduce myself, I'm Steve Conti. I am a project manager on Eversource's electric mobility group. So if you go to the next slide, please. If you're not familiar with Eversource, if you're one of our friends up in Canada or Vermont or Maine, we are the largest energy company in New England, servicing 4 million customers for natural gas, electric, and water across New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. We have a number of energy efficiency programs that are highlighted by this slide here. And we tout ourselves as being, the #1 energy efficiency provider in the nation. And kind of alongside those energy efficiency programs that we offer for customers, we do have some newer electric vehicle charging incentive programs. So next slide. Thank you. So the first and the most important to this conversation being our New Hampshire EV Make Ready program. This was just approved last year and is a smaller program of $2.1 million. And I'll dive into that in a couple of slides. But just for the comprehensive picture, you can see it. We also have programs up and running in Massachusetts. Our phase 1 program has been assisting customers with their with the financial aspect of their EV charging projects in Massachusetts from 2018 until last year. And we just started our new phase 2 program, which is a much larger, almost $200 million program this year. And we are looking to continue that for the next 3.5 years in hopes of further deploying or enabling the deployment of electric vehicle charging infrastructure across our electric service territory. Connecticut has a program that is up and running as well. They operate in three-year cycles, the first of which started last year. And the first cycle is $60 million to spend on customer rebates for EV charging infrastructure. So next slide. So in New Hampshire specifically, as I mentioned, we received approval from the Public Utilities Commission in New Hampshire in August of last year. Essentially what this program offers is supplemental funding for those folks who are receiving grant funding through the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust that was previously mentioned by the other panelists. So essentially what Eversource is doing is for any of those projects that are being approved by the Executive Council for that VW Trust funding opportunity, we are offering supplemental funding to cover all of the utility side infrastructure. If a new service is needed at the premises, which it often is for these DC fast charger sites, a new pole, a new transformer, any before meter conduit or cable will be able to cover the majority of that cost. And we're hoping that this will allow the DES to stretch the Volkswagen funding further and in the future be able to add more sites to the list that they already have approved. Next slide. So as was mentioned previously, there are 6 sites that have been already approved by the Executive Council, 5 of which are in Eversource territory. And we're excited to be able to offer that funding that I mentioned. You kind of see the spread of the sites here. The one in Errol was the first to be approved, and Rose did a great job highlighting some of the great benefits that DC fast charging at that location will bring. And we're excited for the remaining that have been pre-approved to finish their contractual processes and be able to support them as well. Next slide. So a common question that I get, especially when talking with folks in New Hampshire, is about the electrical distribution system that we have and whether or not the grid is ready for the future of electrification through transportation, as we're discussing here, but also in buildings and other sources as well. I'm in close contact with a lot of folks in our system planning group who have assured me many times that the folks who are in that team are looking at all the sources of electrification for the next 10, 20, 30 years in their load growth models. And we have many active projects, particularly highlighting here some in New Hampshire, some new transmission line projects, rebuilding of aged transmission lines, new substations, that's going to be needed to handle the extreme growth in electric load that we do anticipate across all 3 of our states in the next couple of decades. I know we're up against time, so I'll just leave it here with my contact information. Any questions about Eversource's EV charging offerings, feel free to reach out, and thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Steve. what I think is important that I would draw out from the presentations we heard is that there is a balance, a bit of a marriage between the work that the utilities are able to offer and what the state is able to offer, that projects like Arrow and the other ones that were identified are able to take advantage of, getting both support for the electric vehicle infrastructure, but also on the utility make-ready elements, the utility upgrades that may be needed in order to host the additional demand and the additional consumption. What I'm curious about in the limited time that we have left, and I think I'm going to direct it to Rose, is that Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire each depend on travel and tourism for their economies, and getting vehicles from either the Canadian provinces or from southern New England and points south is going to require getting EV charging right in locations where there is either intermittent during the week or even seasonal high demand. So we will have a large number of chargers that are needed for short periods of time. But that seems to require government support. I wonder, Rose, if you might be able to point to where you're seeing the best models for supporting EV investments, whether it's in Canada or in the States.
So two examples come to mind. The first is Mass EVIP, the Massachusetts Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program that was actually based off of Cal EVIP over in California. That offers pretty significant rebate incentives for different types of site hosts, whether that's a municipal site, a fleet, a private entity, like a business, for example. You get a different amount of rebate incentive based on your type of site. And then another program that has seen tremendous success is the NYSERDA Charge Ready program. They recently launched the Charge Ready 2.0 program, the New York State Energy Research Authority, NYSERDA. Those are two very successful programs that I think folks in New England could take a look at to see if there's aspects that could be emulated.
All right, and so that was the NYSERDA. What was the name of that program again? Just for
Yep, Charge Ready. And there was two aspects of it. There was Charge Ready, the original, and now there's the new Charge Ready program, which focuses on installing level 2 stations in low income and community environmental justice communities.
Oh, excellent. Equity has definitely been a point that we've heard raised. And getting charging into these rural areas will both help with travel and tourism, but those that are looking to have those vehicles as well. I want to now turn back to Steve and put you a little bit on the spot. You were noting that some of the charging is, the transmission and distribution plans might be like 10 years out. But in some of these rural areas, we may only have single phase power at this point. Is there anything that can be done that you're aware of or thinking about that kind of fits into a shorter time frame so that we can be getting charging into those areas where DC fast charging might not work at this time?
Sure, yeah. Many of the rural communities up in New Hampshire do have predominantly single phase service, but we try to look for opportunities in maybe more of the town centers or city centers where 3-phase might be available for some of the larger buildings there. And those are more conducive to supporting higher speed level 2 charging or DC fast charging. But if it is an area where it is single phase only, there are options. I think Rose mentioned the 19 kW level 2 charging stations that are going in at Errol. Those are a great solution kind of in the interim if larger utility upgrades are needed to bring 3-phase to the area.
All right, great. Well, we are at time, so I want to thank Jessica, Rose, and Steve so much. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Mike.
Chris, thanks so much. And all of your panelists, particularly for the insights from New Hampshire and what is going on in New Hampshire. As a resident of New Hampshire, I was keenly interested. Follow it all along, but it's great to hear from all of you. Now we move east to Maine and a different part of this equation. A focus on electrification on the water, especially in the tourism space. From ferries to fishing fleets and pleasure craft, EVs are and can be and will be a game changer. Your moderator for this panel is Eric Howard, Executive Director of E2 Tech of Biddeford, which says it is Maine's leading energy, environmental, and clean technology business and economic development organization. Eric, it's all yours.
Thank you so very much, Mike, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to see all of our participants at this program today, looking at New England as well as Canada. E2 Tech, we are a 21-year-old organization which helps support some 300 businesses, agencies, and organizations involved in the energy and environmental space. We're also actively educating the public and decision makers on the application of new technologies and the use of existing ones in new areas. And this topic is an excellent example of that second activity, thinking about how EV kinds of solutions can be applied in the marine environment or the aquatic environment in freshwater ecosystems. We've got three short speakers today. Hank Berg from Casco Bay Lines, Nick Planson from Shred, and Paul McDonald from DNRE. As you can see their names and titles here on the slide. I'm going to immediately pass it over to Hank because he's the person you actually want to be listening to, and I'll let him take over now. Thank you so much, Hank.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Can you hear me okay? Okay, thanks. So as Eric said, my name's Hank Berg, and I'm general manager with the Casco Bay Island Transit District. We're better known as Casco Bay Lines. And because I'm not going to be talking about a vehicle that has rubber tires associated with it, I want to give you a very quick background of Casco Bay Lines and what electrification project we are working on. Next slide, please. Casco Bay Lines is a public ferry system created by special Maine legislation, and we're legally required to serve 6 unbridged islands in Casco Bay. And just a clarification, we are not part of Maine DOT. We do provide passenger, vehicle, and freight service year-round, 365 days a year, and we carry over 1.1 million passengers, over 40,000 vehicles, and over 500,000 pieces of freight annually. Actually, just a point of note, the freight has actually increased since the pandemic because of an amazing thing called Amazon and packages delivered at the island by them. Just a data point is the district actually celebrated our 40th anniversary last year. However, the name Casco Bay Lines really goes back for over 150 years. Next slide, please. So the area that we serve is 6 islands in the Casco Bay of Portland, Maine. And we are literally the lifeline to these islands. If you need something at your home, just basic everyday home goods, or any construction work, or vehicles, or anything that you need to live on the island, we provide that. And we have 2 route profiles. One is to the most populous island called Peaks Island, and that route is literally back and forth almost every hour a day, and it takes 15 minutes each way. The other route is called the Down Bay Island, where we serve the other 5 islands, and has a variety of stop sequences and round trips to take up about either 1.5 hours or up to 3 hours. Next slide, please. Can you hit enter again? Thank you. So our fleet, we have 5 vessels, 4 are active in active service, and 1 spare. That spare we actually use to charter out when it's available for supplemental income. We consider a useful life for a vessel to be 30 years. That doesn't mean she's not safe. That means it just costs a lot to keep her in service, except for the spare vessel, because the spare vessel gets so few hours on it. We consume over 300,000 gallons of fuel annually. And we started down the journey of climate action by switching over to an 80-20 biodiesel mix back in 2014, and really haven't looked back since. But as you can see by this chart, we have an aging fleet with an average age of 26.2 years. So we recently undertook a project of replacing the vessel, which is the Mashigan 2, which is about 36 years old right now, which carries passengers, cars, and freight. Next slide, please. So the replacement vessel is the artist's conception of it, rendition of it. The vessel is 164 feet long, a little bit longer than a bus, 40 feet wide, and she can transport up to 599 passengers, 15 vehicles, bikes, and freight. And she's going to be double-ended, so there won't have to be turning around at either end of the trip. And a little bit of background in Maine. So the Maine's Island Institute identified that Maine's transportation sector accounts for 54% of CO2 emissions in the state. And of that, each year, the state's two largest ferry operators, us, Casco Bay Lines, and the Maine State Ferry Service emit over 8,000 metric tons of CO2. There's also a big effort in terms of state and local climate action plans, which have set aggressive goals for improvement, which we at Casco Bay Lines take very seriously. So when we were undertaking the project of replacing the vessel, we started to do some very thoughtful and thorough research and analysis of alternative propulsion systems. That's a whole nother story to tell that would take an hour or so. But one thing I wanted to point out is that a little bit different than the buses, each marine application is different. Every vessel is different because every vessel has a different service profile. But during our research, we found, as you all know, that electric propulsion systems are mature technology in other parts of the world. I'm talking mostly from the marine environment, but it's a really cutting edge in the US marine environment, especially for public ferries. We also learned that it's very clear that the direction of the US marine industry is going in the electric propulsion systems. They are also actually looking at other alternative propulsion systems. Public ferry systems are a little bit behind the private sector, and we are probably in the leading edge for the public systems. And so based on our research and analysis, we decided to proceed with a diesel-electric hybrid technology with a battery capacity of 900 kilowatt hours with a plan to operate fully electric, but there will be a diesel backup on that. And if we run fully electric, we'll eliminate 800 to 1,000 metric tons of CO2 annually for 30 years. Senesco Marine in Rhode Island's constructing the vessel. ABB is providing the propulsion system, and we expect the delivery in mid-2024. Next slide, please. So this charger we're going to be using is a little bit different than an EV charger. As I said, our trip for this vessel takes 15 minutes each way. We're going to use 220, we expect to use 220 kilowatt hours of the 900 kilowatt hour capacity. But to maintain a 10-year battery life, charging is required on each run. And we can only charge on the Portland side because the island doesn't have the infrastructure required to support it. So we need to charge 220 kilowatt hours in only 10 minutes for each trip. So it's a very quick charge with a lot of energy, and we need 1.3 megawatts of power to accomplish this. And it has to be automated because being manual would take too much time. We have to factor in tides, winds, and swells. And we came up with a solution, and the provider is Stenman. It's all automatic and accounts for all the variables that are necessary in the marine environment. So that's a quick overview. Hopefully, I'll be able to answer some questions when appropriate, and I appreciate being invited to this and look forward to the rest of it. Thank you.
Okay, our second speaker today here on this panel is Nick Planson, who also has some slides to share. And so I will let him show his pictures and slides. Shred is also based in the greater Portland area.
Yes, hi, thank you very much for having me. I'm Nick Planson. I'm with a Maine-based startup called Shred Electric. And we are looking into electrification of systems, boats, and off-road vehicles. So anything that's not on the road, we're looking into how best to electrify them. Next slide, please. Where we are starting is actually the aquaculture space. Aquaculture has become a significant industry in Northeast US, on the west side as well, and in Canada. And because it's a new industry, a lot of farmers are doing things very differently. I liked Scott's comment, when you've seen one, you've seen one. because truly, even in the same bay or body of water, like Casco Bay here in Maine, each farmer is doing things a little bit differently and doing a bunch of things in a DIY fashion. So what we're focusing on and what we have grant funding to do is to replace the gasoline generators, gasoline pumps, hydraulic pumps that are used on these farms with electric alternatives. That'll mostly be batteries, whether portable or stationary, and when applicable, have it charged on the farms by solar and micro wind turbines. Next slide, please. What you see here is a lovely gasoline generator that has only been used for one season on a sea farm here in Casco Bay. It's actually used by a cooperative of sea farms where they share assets and help each other out with labor. So the problem with this equipment, which you can quite see from, easily see from this picture, is they rust very quickly, need a lot of maintenance. They get replaced all the time. Anyone who's run a generator during a power outage, you know how loud it is. You know how hard it is to fill it up with gas without dripping or spilling a little bit. And just imagine having that out on a sea farm for usually about 6 months of the year. Additionally, the noise impacts not just the workers, but also wildlife. And where a lot of these farms are located, there are fancy coastal homes, and people don't want to hear a generator turn on the water at daybreak. Next slide, please. So our solution are commercial industrial quality batteries that are encased so that they can survive for many years on the sea and get powered by renewables built right into those sea farms in most cases. In other cases, the batteries could live on the workboat and get charged at the dock or on the slip and then be brought out to power the equipment on the farm. The overall goal is to help farmers focus on farming and less time on fixing their equipment, maintaining it, and fueling it. As we've been going through and meeting with dozens of farmers in the Northeast, and soon we'll be heading up to Canadian Maritimes and then to the West Coast in Alaska, what we've been learning is while the environmental factors of operating greener and cleaner are certainly attractive to these industries, particularly because the products that they're growing, oysters, kelp, mussels, actually clean the waters as they grow. The convincing factors of why to make this move are the operational considerations. So the fact that this equipment lasts a lot longer, it can help them do their primary jobs for a longer time span every day. And again, I mentioned spend way less time fixing equipment. The other area that we have been looking into for the past couple of years is electric outboard motors. We've used grant funding to acquire some motors, test them, get them on the water with sea farmers so they can give us feedback on what makes sense about them, what needs to be improved, and really taking an approach not of just trying to sell lots of these motors, instead taking time to analyze, okay, how far offshore is your farm? Where would you charge it? How long are your days? Do you work all winter? And do you have to factor in the fact that batteries have less energy when they're cold, at least lithium batteries do. So it's really not a one size fits all approach. That's why we're learning from farms in different parts of North America and working hard to replace all of that gas machinery on the farms. And we're also testing out some off-road vehicles that would use the same battery packs, for example, electric snowmobiles and UTVs. I think that's my last slide, so thank you very much. There are some of the vehicles.
Okay, next slide, please. So our final presenter on the panel here is Paul McDonald, who's Marine Operations Director for the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure over the border in New Brunswick. There's a lot of exchange of knowledge going back and forth across the border, and so we're very pleased to have him on this panel as well. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Eric, and other panelists. I appreciate being invited along to participate in this. I guess I would say that at this point, this is a bit of a sponge type approach for us. We're just very much in the infancy of trying to learn a little more about what other jurisdictions are doing and what options are and where people are heading with their marine fleets. So just to give you a little history on us, I guess, as Eric said, we're the Brunswick Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. There's been ferries running around on the St. John River for 100 years at least, perhaps longer in some in the smaller locations. Up till very recently, there was no particular marine group kind of overseeing this and looking at the future. It was generally kind of grouped in with DOTs, the people who manage bridges and roads and culverts sort of had ferries kind of sitting on the corner of their desk as a sideline thing, I suppose, and didn't have a terrible lot of understanding necessarily about them. And a couple of years ago, someone within the government thought that if we want to sort of move an aging fleet into kind of the next 100 years, let's say, that perhaps some people with some marine background would make sense. So we established a marine department a couple of years ago, of which I became, I guess, the leader of the pack. And then we started looking at really what we had today, where investment might be needed, how we grow and whatnot. So to give you, I guess, a little more background, we have 13 ferries operating around the province, and those ferries range anywhere from a small 15-car cable ferry that runs not much more than a couple of 100 meters across the river to up to an 82-car ferry with a 380-person capacity operating out in the Bay of Fundy, salt water, traveling to the island of Grand Manan. And we sort of have a little bit of everything in between. All of that infrastructure is aging. The average age of our fleet is 40 years old. We have one vessel that's 65 years old, and we have the newest one, which is only 5 years old at this time. All of these vessels are diesel generated at this point. There hasn't been too much consideration given to the, let's say, the greenness of the fleet. So we're looking or starting to look at perhaps adding to the fleet over the next 2 to 5 years. And I guess our interest in this is to try to learn as much as we can about what's happening elsewhere and what our options are, and how we sort of move, I would say, into the future from a emissions point of view. So right now, our intention is to replace one small vessel somewhere around a 30-car capacity, 150 person. It would be running on a cable. It's quite a busy area. It transports a couple of million people. It's sort of nonstop, runs 22 vessels there, run 24 hours a day. So again, we're sort of trying to learn a little bit about what are the challenges on a nonstop service. Is there electrification possibilities, or a little bit of, I would say, research we've done? We had the sense that perhaps that type of vessel would need some downtime to get batteries up to full capacity, and then perhaps short spurt bump ups through the day to keep them there. So we're not really clear yet whether it's an option to move to full electrification in that type of an environment. And then the second project we see coming in the next 5 years would be to replace a relatively large 80 to 100 car vessel with 400 to 500 person capacity on about a 3-hour crossing to an island. There may be some challenges with electrical infrastructure on the island, but the ferry would have overnight downtime as well. So that's, I guess, our interest in this and perhaps future panels, mostly as a learning opportunity. Anyway, you can move to the next slide, Eric. So this just gives you a little bit of an idea of the range of stuff that we're working with. So in one case here, you have a 24-car ferry traveling on a cable across the St. John River. The St. John River really divides the province of New Brunswick. For those who don't know, it's about 400-mile travels from north to south, and with people living on both sides of that river, that is really a primary piece of real estate within the province. There's only so many bridges, so these ferries are really, really important pieces of connecting communities. Even back and forth just from a social point of view, but it's also connecting them to goods and services people are using to commute to work. It's a fair big tourism draw. Altogether, we move about 5 million passengers a year. So again, I think the top picture is a 24-car cable ferry. The bottom one's a 15-car self-propelled ferry that runs to a small island out in the middle of the Bay of Fundy. And then the other one is an 82-car ferry with about a 380 passenger capacity, transiting to Grand Banana Island. That's really all I have at this point, folks. And again, I thank everybody for their information and greatly appreciate it being invited.
Thank you very much, Paul. I said the ferries, whether they be in New Brunswick or in Maine or in other parts of North America or other parts of the world, are really important lifelines for the people on both sides of the ferry rides. And so reliability is really, really important. And to assure the reliability, I know that the ferry operators spend a lot of time and money on maintaining the equipment. Do any of the three of you have some thoughts on operational savings in terms of shifting from, say, diesel to electric?
I do, Eric. So we did an analysis. If we operated our new vessel for 30 years, all electric, didn't have to use the diesel standby, and if the electric utility company didn't charge the peak rate, we would actually be saving about $100,000 to $250,000 annually because we don't have to do all the maintenance of mechanical devices.
Yeah. What about you, Nick? When you're talking to the aquaculture people whose vessels are smaller but also equally important to their business?
Certainly. So that's exactly the work we have underway right now with our USDA funded research. It's to assess what equipment is being used currently, how are they powering it, what are the maintenance and fueling and replacement costs, and really developing a duty cycle. How often are you using this machine, for how many hours are others using it too? So it's really to come up with the cost benefit, because as I'm sure most people know, going electric with EVs or battery alternatives oftentimes is more costly upfront. However, over time, you certainly get benefits, not just from the reduced maintenance and increased reliability, but also in the case of sea farmers, expanded work hours, because they can start at daybreak and at noon and then move on to other activities.
Yeah, because again, your vehicles may be in use for 8 to 18 hours a day as compared to my electric car that I use for maybe 1 or 2 hours at most on a given day. Nick, you also just threw out a phrase that I was going to be asking about, which is the funding for research and development and the design of these kinds of systems. You just referred to that you have some externally funded research. What's going on in the larger boat area? Who is funding the R&D for you? Is that being funded internally by the lines, or is it being funded by the manufacturers or others?
Are you asking me, Eric?
Yeah, for
Okay.
you, for Hank and Paul.
Sure, yeah, that's a great question because this new vessel actually the total cost is pretty significant of $25 million. So it's challenging to get one funding source. And we actually got funding from 7 different funding sources. But again, we're a public ferry system, so we have the ability to go after some funding that is available for public transit operators. And so we use the Federal Transit Administration urban formula funds that come to the Portland region. We submitted competitive proposals for the FTA urban discretionary funds for the ferry boat program. MARAD, the DOT's Marine Division, we got some funding from them. We got some funding from the state of Maine. We got some funding from the VW Settlement Fund, from the city of Portland, and we had to kick in a local match of 15 to 20% of the total project. So it's a little bit of a juggling game, but well worth it.
Yeah. Paul, do you have any ideas in terms of how it's being funded in Canada?
Not really. And again, I think we're very much in the infancy of even discussing this. One, I guess, in the background, the provincial governments of Eastern Canada, which would be New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI, and Newfoundland, are approaching, sort of as a collective, approaching the federal government to at least get discussions started on funding marine projects. And I think the federal government is at least starting to listen and try to understand what all of our needs and challenges are and the costs. And again, I'll say that I know that no one else in Atlantic Canada either has moved in the direction of electrification yet, or even hybrid of the group. So I would say this is a very infancy conversation that hopefully I'll be able to share some of with other jurisdictions as well, as we move along with, I would say, conversations with the federal government about funding models.
Yeah, we had a question from the participants for Hank. Your charger is going to be using quite a bit of electricity for very brief periods of time. That's a lot of electricity. How is that impacting the power grid in Portland when used for 20 minutes are suddenly sucking up the electricity that might be used by 500 houses?
Yeah, it's a great question because one of the biggest challenges, especially for waterfront businesses, is getting the infrastructure down to the site to have that much power available. We were actually extremely lucky in that about 20 years ago or so, Bath Iron Works had a floating dry dock down very close to our location. Yes, and they put in the infrastructure down there, and they're no longer here. So we took advantage of what was existing here. So all we had to do was tap into it. But that's a huge problem for everyone all around is getting the infrastructure into a waterfront or even an urban environment that's already there. And we're working with the utility company and the public, the electric utility company and the Public Utilities Commission in our needs, especially in terms of rates. And like I referred to, the peak electric rate is a challenge right now also.
Yeah. Actually, there was another comment, question about demand charges and time of day when electricity is going to be being used. And so again, in many parts of the country or elsewhere, if you're using electricity at 1 in the afternoon, the price is different than if you're using it at 11 o'clock at night.
Oh, correct. It's a huge deal. And the Public Utilities Commission is starting to address that in Maine and working with the electric utility companies to try to come up with a different rate that will help mitigate that.
Yeah. because Nick, for you and the clients that you're using, presumably they're going to be charging their batteries overnight, so they're all ready in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's good to think about what kind of charger you need where based on your use case. You know, the farmers that we work with, they don't have slips in marinas, they don't have access to pay for that kind of fuel, and they don't necessarily have ready access to charging. So facilities where they work out of, in some cases, if it has access to 3-phase power, then a fast DC charger, like for road vehicles, is applicable to boats and available. In other cases, if it's just going to be used during the day, then having a level 2 or even level 1 charger can be perfectly sufficient.
Okay,
And
thank you
it's
so
really
much.
encouraging to hear that people are looking into how to reduce some of the cost on non-road electric vehicles. Thank you.
Thank you very
Eric,
much.
I'm going to just jump in here.
Okay.
Just in the interest of time, excuse me, and thank you for your able leadership of this panel. Hank, Nick, and Paul for sharing your stories and your wonderful insights, what's going on in Maine and New Brunswick. And Hank, good luck with the Peaks Island Ferry being done hopefully next year. And it's so exciting for all of you. 3 excellent, wonderful panels on different aspects of where we are right now in this, again, evolving revolution. Now we move on to our final 2 speakers. And in this part of the program, the challenges of battery technology and production. There's the impact of heat and cold, also battery life, reliability. The improvements we've seen just in the last year or 2 are remarkable. For example, you may have seen this summer that Toyota claims it has developed a solid-state car battery with a range of 745 miles on a 10-minute charge. Now, it still requires lithium. And Canada, not China, could be key. So with that, let me introduce Dina Santos, Acting Consul General to New England and Senior Trade Commissioner, with some thoughts. And she will also introduce our final speaker, our keynote speaker today. Dina?
Thank you so much, Mike, and the New England Canada Business Council for this insightful event. It's been great to hear from so many Canadian and New England leaders on the line today discussing EV deployment strategies, practical infrastructure implementation advice, and shared challenges. So many of you have touched on this in your remarks, but before I introduce our final speaker, I'd like to share a few points about Canada's role in the electric vehicle supply chain from beginning to end. Everyone listening knows that the decarbonization of our respective economies represents once-in-a-generation opportunity to create the green economy of the future. Canada is the only country in North America that has all the critical minerals required to manufacture EV batteries, and our mineral sector can help the US achieve its climate goals. Significant investments have been made by the Government of Canada and manufacturers to support this energy transition and build the ecosystem. This includes our 4 billion Canadian critical mineral strategy. And since 2018, automotive and battery manufacturers such as Volkswagen, GM, Ford, LG, Michelin, BASF have invested over $26 billion in Canada to transition to electric vehicle production and establish a battery supply chain. We've gone from 22,000 EV produced in Canada in 2013 to 2 million today. We're seeing Canadian companies like New Brunswick-based Irving Oil with few locations across Atlantic Canada and New England deploying EV fast chargers, and of course, Quebec-based charging company Flow here today powering future EVs on the road in an inclusive, equitable way and creating new jobs in the US. All of these investments are being done to continue to build on Canada's position as the partner of choice for the United States when it comes to energy, climate and environmental cooperation, and further integrate our cross-border regional economy and competitiveness, leveraging our USMCA free trade agreement. Your success is our success. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce the closing speaker, Anna van der Kamp, who will discuss how Canada is ensuring transportation decarbonization all across its coasts. Anna has worked on environmental and clean technology issues for over 25 years in the private sector, NGOs, and for the last 14 years in the federal government. She has a wide range of experiences in the areas of strategic policy, regulations, results, and programs. Her current role is the Executive Director of the Transportation and Fuels Decarbonization Programs at Natural Resources Canada. Before joining the government, she worked as director with the Delphi Group for several years. So take it away, Anna.
Hello, thank you very much. It's great to be here. And I have a series of slides that I'm going to work through, but I'm going to probably plow through the slides and speak to other things as we go, and hopefully you can get the information later. So I just thought I'd give you a real overview of our approach. So maybe we can just move on. I'll to the first slide just to say, here's the things that I want to touch on. It would be first giving you some context, and then something about our major regulations, incentive programs. I'm just going to give you sort of the marquee points of how the Canadian government, the federal government, is addressing. And we do this always, as was mentioned, in concert with the provinces, and certainly more and more every day with our colleagues in the US on cross-border issues. So this is really exciting to be here. So we'll go to the next slide. So just for those of you that don't know, for transportation is about 25% of our emissions. And here's the breakout in terms of where those come from in the transportation sector. Although I would say heavy duty vehicles, the emissions from that are going up greatly, probably in relation to all the other sectors. So that's one that we're keeping our eye on. If I go to the next slide, just wanted to quickly touch on the fact that we are increasing in our ZEV adoption. So this presentation will mostly be about LDVs and a bit on MHDVs, with a bit more on marine and aviation and rail later. But this is LDV, and depending on the source that you have, we're anywhere from 8% to 10% in terms of our adoption rates. I think pretty close to the US. US is catching up fast as far as I know. So this is really taking off. After 5%, usually you could would assume that we are kind of at an inflection point where you're going to see a steep rise in adoption of technologies if you consider how things have gone in the past. So with other technologies, so this is really exciting times, and exciting that it's also happening in the US. So we'll go to the next slide. So Canada has a bit of an interesting approach in that we've taken a regulatory approach to sales, a sale of new cars. There's a proposed light duty vehicle regulation on the books, and expecting an actual finalization of that later in the late fall. That assumes 100% sales by 2035 with various targets along the way. And then also for MHDV, which we have going, same idea, but a bit later, and certainly more flexibilities based in there, based on the feasibility. It's interesting to me to note that the US is now kind of separating medium and heavy duty, which I think is a great idea in the most recent series of information that came out on your approach. So I thought that was interesting, but we are still grouping those together. And I thought I would also mention that the federal government, which has this huge fleet of its own vehicles, is electrifying as well. And this is one of the highlighted targets that we have, 100% by 2030 for new sale again. So this is all moving fairly quickly, and that's a regulatory approach that we agreed to take. But at the same time, if I go to the next slide, we do have a lot of incentives. We have a federal incentive program for LDVs, IZEV, one for MHDV, medium and heavy duty vehicles. We have zero emission transit fund, and a trucking program. All sorts of, these are just the marquee. There are a lot of other R&D type projects in the back of programs in the background. And of course, we have the provinces. I'm sure you maybe heard about Quebec today, earlier today. New Brunswick, you can get up to $5,000 for a vehicle. Nova Scotia, $3,000. So our Atlantic provinces, Quebec, Ontario, also not Ontario right now, but following suit and in helping in that way. So we'll go to the next slide. So my job actually is really my job specifically from day to day is about charging infrastructure. I am aware of all these other policies for our federal family, but this is my job that I get excited about. This is a really interesting diagram that comes from NREL, from your US Energy Lab. And it talks about the charging needs. And it's really interesting to me because it's really a different model. And I'm sure those folks on the line are aware. There is public charging that's need. Really fast charging is kind of the trunk along the corridors. Public charging in spaces like shopping malls or destinations, et cetera, on the street is very visible out on the street. But you need, say, for the US, the last study from NREL was assessing that would be about a million or so on the street. 182,000 fast chargers, but then under the ground or in your homes or in your multi-unit residential buildings is this massive network of charging, of private charging. 26 million in the US. And so the Canadian numbers are basically somewhat the same. And in fact, that route system, if you went just by sheer volume of number of chargers, would be like huge if you see if those dots. So it's really interesting to just have a different way of thinking about, especially on-road charging needs. And I know there, panels are talking about lots of different applications, but this is how we think about on-road charging. So for on-road charging, if I go to the next slide, we have several programs that are addressing some of those different parts of that tree. Currently we have a ZEVIT program, which is where Canadians live, work, and play. It's about those MURBs, the workplaces, the fleets. We do some funding along highways, et cetera, with ZEVIT, but really the focus is on level 2s and the ones that are sort of, below the ground and some above the ground. We have what we call EVA FIDI, which is closed now, but was really focused on high traffic highways, et cetera. And we also are supported. So those are Natural Resources Canada, where I'm from. We also supported by the Canadian Infrastructure Bank that has another extra 500 million that's providing financing for public fast chargers. So those are some of the big pieces that we have in Canada that fund charging. And we'll go to the next slide. A little bit more on this, I would remiss to say that charging infrastructure is going to be both a public and a private investment that's required. We're seeing more and more private investment all the time, and more, of course, of those folks from our provinces. You heard about Quebec today. It's really exciting what Quebec's doing. BC is also the same. Ontario is about to launch a program. So the provinces are doing a lot. But also on the private side, there was this big joint venture with 7 different companies, including some majors that announced 30,000 chargers across North America. So we're hoping to get a small portion of that in Canada. Tesla's opening up a bunch of their chargers for us in Canada, much like they are in the US. And we see a lot of significant sector commitments across North America, of which some will also come to us. So it's really a game. It's a shared responsibility. It's an interesting, evolving space. It's very hard to understand. We're trying to understand where and when we need to invest as a federal government versus provinces versus private sector, and it's dynamic, but it's exciting. I threw in the next slide, which is a little bit of a comparison. Basically, I had talked before about our regs. So the top level there is about the regs, and it's pretty equivalent to what we understand the US to be doing. Different approaches. We took a real regulatory approach on sales, and the US has a different approach, but it's interesting. Tons of funding, great funding for NEVI, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, as well as our own funding, lots of funding out there, and current states fairly equivalent. I would say maybe just for the next year or two, Canada's ahead, and I see the US catching up very fast in terms of the number of EVs per port or the kilowatt hours that we're providing per EV. So we're both, I think, in lockstep, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. So go to the next slide. I know that you had folks that were here that, of course, from Marine, which I was just listened into that very interesting panel about Marine. I do want to say that we definitely have a sort of Clean Marine RD&D program, and I believe that they're looking for funding, and they have funded several great projects already. So as was alluded to, the federal government's involved and trying to support RD&D in that area. But we also, these are the main focuses for the different parts. So for aviation, there's a new task force. We have a bit of a focus on sustainable aviation fuel. That's not necessarily electrification yet, although there is some of that work going on. But we had a great Sky's the Limit challenge that announced NRCan being a $5 million winner of a really interesting sort of consortia approach to RD&D, which is great, that we did here at NRCan. And then there is bills being introduced that are going to require airports to look at their planning. Same with Marine, we're really looking at our international commitments. And of course, the Green Shipping Corridor program, which was announced in one of our recent budgets, is really about the sort of the corridors with the US. So it's exciting work there. And then the Railway Association is focusing on targets. We actually have our first hydrogen-powered train running in Quebec, funded by Quebec government and others, but the fueling is coming from a federally funded hydrogen station. So we're excited about that. So that just gives you a little touch of what we have going in terms of aviation, marine, and rail. And the next one, I wanted to highlight for you the Canada-US Task Force. And that's really important because it's going to make sure that we are working together at these cross-border issues. I see we're at time, and Nick, Mike, I see you coming up, so I just got 2 more slides quickly. But I want to say that, you know, that task force is really focusing on the alternative, what we call alternative fuel corridors. First one was Detroit, Michigan, but there are, of course, major fuel corridors in this region of the world that you're all from. So we're taking a look at that, and that means trying to make sure that you've got the same charging. You can expect the same charging experience more or less as you cross the border, which we think is really important. And my final one here, we have a ZEB Council in Canada that's also taking a look at all of these important issues. And we do awareness. I think I'm just gonna have to stop there because you're already at time, hey, Mike. And I could talk for a long time about this stuff. I'm excited about it, but I'll leave it there.
And we so enjoy listening to you, Anna, and thank you so much for that federal perspective, and also Dina as well, so valuable. Let's just wrap up and bring in the co-chair of this event, who is Tim Egan. And Tim's a lot of value today for anybody who is joining this. And I just want to look ahead as we wrap here, because you have what I think is one of your premier, maybe your premier event of the year, the 31st annual NECBC Energy Conference. It's coming up November 1st and 2nd in Boston at the Seaport Hotel. It's a major event. So what's the theme this year? What are the highlights? What should people look for?
Well, Mike, thank you. We're very excited that part of the Energy Conference this year will include a showcase by the Quebec province of some of their fascinating new ventures in vehicle expansion. So everybody thinks EV, they think cars, and maybe they think Sprinter vans and 18-wheelers. But between companies like XPAC Industries, Texol Marine, Gemotech, ExpoLink, and Demers Ambulances, we're going to see vehicles that are doing street sweeping, or that could be used for snow plowing, or even areas where some of the infrastructure is allowed to be able to help municipalities engage and reduce costs in the EV space. So that'll be a first part of our November 1st day of the Energy Conference, which is at the Seaport Hotel in Boston. So November 1st and 2nd, if you want to go to our website, necbc.org, and check that out, you can learn a little bit more about the EV decarbonization showcase, courtesy of our friends at the Quebec Delegates Office. We are sort of a little over, so I just want to make sure that I thank all of our panelists. Fascinating information that helps us sort of understand big pictures of how we're expanding our transit systems, how we're utilizing our batteries to build out our infrastructure and work with our energy companies to accomplish that. And what was really exciting about the conversation from Maine is how we're really looking at understanding the coastline and respecting that, environmentally and financially, we're able to create a infrastructure for EV ferry systems, which could be a game changer for just business, but for tourism and for some of these fishermen who really struggle with making a living every year. So we're very excited that that content was there. Again, I want to thank our sponsors, the Canadian Consulate Office of New England and the Quebec office in Boston, and our partners E2 Tech, VEIC, and Clean Energy New Hampshire. We wouldn't be able to do this without our partners who help us find wonderful people doing fascinating work. So on behalf of the New England Canada Business Council, I'd like to thank you, Mike, for emceeing our event, our co-chair, Peter Howe, our president, John Gulliver, and all of our board members who support our initiatives every day. Mike, I'll let you have the final comment.
No other comment other than necbc.org. You can sign up for the November conference now. It's live. I enjoyed being here, Tim. We thank all of you watching who are attending and then watching this webinar later, the recording. Many of you will do that. And again, we hope to see you all in November.